Welcome to Arsenal, where the weapons and war machines of military history come to life. Today, we explore the U-2 Dragon Lady, the high-altitude spy plane that watched the Cold War from 70,000 feet and beyond. A longer version with fact sheets and photos is available in the print edition on LinkedIn or by email. You can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com. It is dawn over Cuba in October 1962. At a small airfield in Florida, a pilot in a bulky pressure suit shuffles across the tarmac, moving more like an astronaut than a typical airman. Everyone on that ramp understands that this single flight will help decide how close the world is to nuclear war. The aircraft accelerates and lifts away, climbing out over the sea. In the cockpit, the U-2 feels less like a jet and more like a glider that happens to roar, its great wings clawing for height in the thin morning air. Inside that cramped cockpit, the pressure suit is stiff and unforgiving. The pilot's movement is restricted, and every action becomes deliberate. A slow hand on the throttle, careful adjustments on the trim, measured checks of the instruments. A touch too fast and the aircraft can overspeed, with almost no warning between the two extremes.
Far below, Cuba slides beneath the nose of the Dragon Lady. Fields, roads, and rail lines give way to sharper shapes, cleared pads, straight-edged embankments, and the angular outlines of missile sites under construction. The pilot follows his precise track line exactly, knowing that a few miles off course could miss the targets that matter most.
As the mission continues, the threat is invisible but very real. Enemy radars are probing for the aircraft, and surface-to-air missiles now have the reach to threaten even this rarefied altitude. When he finally turns for home, he carries evidence that will shape diplomacy and strategy, and that will help define the U-2's reputation as the airplane that looked straight into the heart of the Cold War. The moment over Cuba is part of a larger story about why this machine was built in the first place. In the early decades of the nuclear age, leaders in the United States faced a terrifying question. What was happening deep inside the Soviet Union and other close societies, and how could they know soon enough to act wisely? Strategic planners worried about bomber bases, missile fields, and nuclear storage sites that simply did not appear in reliable detail on existing maps. By the early 1950s, low and medium altitude penetration over a major power had become close to suicidal. Radar networks grew denser, interceptor aircraft became faster, and anti-aircraft guns more accurate. At the same time, satellites were still only design studies and ambitious proposals, not machines that could yet fly operational missions. Engineers and intelligence officers converged on the same basic answer. If they could not sneak under air defenses, they would go over them, into a part of the sky no one had yet exploited for routine operations. From that effort came the U-2 Dragon Lady, a frail-looking but formidable tool built to solve a strategic reconnaissance problem that no other system could yet answer. It was optimized not for speed, maneuverability, or combat in the usual sense, but for sealing and endurance above all else. The U-2 began as a simple sketch at Lockheed, an idea that looked almost too minimal to be real. Designers imagined a jet engine attached to wings more at home on a soaring sailplane than a fighter. In the early 1950s, the Central Intelligence Agency and the United States turned to Lockheed's Skunk Works team to turn that sketch into a secret operational aircraft under intense time pressure. Engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson and his small group of specialists traded almost everything in a conventional combat aircraft for altitude and endurance. Development moved at a pace that would be nearly unthinkable today. The time from contract approval to first flight was measured in months, not years, with prototypes assembled and tested at a remote airfield carved out of the Nevada desert. The team accepted a set of deliberate compromises as the price of reaching the edge of space. The U-2 would have a single engine with no backup, a spindly bicycle-style landing gear that demanded perfect handling, and wings so long they visibly flexed under load. At a glance, the U-2 was a single-seat, high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft built by the United States and operated first by the Central Intelligence Agency and the United States Air Force. One pilot sat alone in a pressurized cockpit, while a large ground and intelligence team supported every mission from below. Its primary capability was long-range photographic reconnaissance, using cameras able to resolve relatively small objects from extreme altitude. Typical performance included routine cruising altitudes above 70,000 feet, speeds in the high subsonic range, and mission durations measured in many hours instead of minutes. Seen up close on the ramp, the U-2 does not look like a classic Cold War Titan. The fuselage is narrow, the nose long and pointed, and the wings stretch so far to either side that ground crew fit temporary pogo wheels near the tips just to keep them from scraping the concrete. Under the belly, camera bays and sensor housings dominate the shape, reminding everyone that this aircraft's main weapons are its eyes. A tall, single fin at the tail keeps the whole machine in line through the thin air where it spends most of its life. Inside, the cockpit feels more like a capsule than a roomy flight deck. Early U-2 pilots climbed aboard wearing full pressure suits, similar to those used by astronauts, complete with gloves, helmet, and their own life support system. The instrument panel is packed, yet straightforward, with altimeter, airspeed, and attitude indicators sharing space with engine gauges, navigation instruments, and camera controls. Once strapped in and sealed, the pilot's movement becomes very limited. Every switch throw and dial adjustment requires deliberate, often awkward motions in bulky gloves. Just behind the cockpit sits the main camera bay, the heart of the early U-2. It houses large-format optical cameras pointed through carefully designed windows in the fuselage, each window shaped and polished to avoid distorting the images. Before each mission, technicians load long rolls of high-resolution film into the cameras, then close access panels and check heaters and stabilizers that keep the optics aligned and the film from cracking in the intense cold at altitude. Over time, new sensors join these cameras. Side-looking radar provides all-weather imaging when clouds or darkness hide the ground. The engine is buried deep in the fuselage, with intakes blended into the sides so as not to disturb the airflow over the wings more than necessary. On climb-out, it pushes the aircraft steadily toward its operating ceiling. Once the U-2 reaches its patrol altitude, the engine settles into a lower power setting and spends many hours gently pulling the Dragon Lady through the thin air. Living with the U-2 means accepting that flying it is a team effort, even if only one person sits inside. Ground crews fuel the aircraft, load its film or digital media, and inspect the delicate airframe with a careful eye, paying special attention to those long wings and complex sensor bays. At takeoff and landing, they work very close to the aircraft, ready to pull away the temporary wingtip wheels and then chase the aircraft down the runway in trucks when it returns. Intelligence officers and photo interpreters wait for the film once the aircraft is back under cover. They rush the canisters to processing labs, where the ghostly high-altitude images are developed, examined, and turned into briefings and maps that will inform decisions at the highest levels. For the pilot, those long missions bring both physical strain and mental isolation. Managing the narrow coffin corner where stall and overspeed live uncomfortably close together demands constant attention. They also carry the quiet understanding that the pictures they bring home may help prevent a war. The pilots who flew the U-2 often said that their real weapon was not the aircraft itself, but the film inside it. From the beginning, the Dragon Lady's combat was fought with lenses and reels instead of guns and missiles. Its baptism of fire came in the late 1950s when the first operational sorties crossed deep into Soviet airspace from airfields on the edges of Europe and Asia. Pilots flew alone over factory towns, bomber bases, naval yards, and missile test ranges that Western planners had only seen as vague patches on old maps.
That illusion ended on a May morning in 1960 when Francis Gary Powers took off from Pakistan on a long track planned to cross some of the most sensitive territory in the Soviet Union. High overhead, the U-2 still seemed untouchable in the cockpit. Yet surface-to-air missile batteries on the ground had quietly evolved to match it. Near Sverdlovsk, a salvo of missiles rose to meet the intruder, guided by radars that could finally reach into the U-2's high refuge. People on the ground saw white streaks slash across the sky, a sudden violent contrast to the quiet contrail.
The Dragon Lady's story did not end with that wrecked airframe. 2 years later, the aircraft's cameras revealed Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba, providing the hard proof that framed the Cuban Missile Crisis. Daily flights tracked new launchers being emplaced, support equipment arriving in convoys, and camouflaged bunkers spreading around the sites as the standoff sharpened. The Dragon Lady's baptism of fire thus stretched from invisible battles over the Soviet Union to a razor's-edge confrontation over Cuba, proving that photographs could be as decisive as bombs in shaping the course of the Cold War. Crews and commanders valued the U-2 for one overwhelming strength: the ability to see what no one else could. Its high altitude and long endurance made it possible to map vast industrial complexes, track construction over time, and monitor troop movements and missile deployments with a clarity that reshaped intelligence estimates. The images brought home did not just brief a single squadron commander, they often went straight into folders carried into rooms where presidents and prime ministers weighed war and peace. Those strengths came with heavy costs. The U-2 was notoriously unforgiving to fly, especially near its operational ceiling, where the margin between stall and overspeed was razor-thin. A small change in speed or attitude could push the aircraft into danger, with little time to recover in the thin air. Landings were equally treacherous, with gusts, crosswinds, and the bicycle landing gear conspiring to punish even small errors in judgment. Enemy forces learned to exploit the Dragon Lady's weaknesses as years passed. Surface-to-air missiles grew more capable, radar networks more dense, and political tolerance for manned overflights more limited as each incident carried diplomatic risks. The U-2 had no real way to defend itself beyond staying high and staying on track, with no speed or maneuvering margin to dodge or fight back. Compared with faster reconnaissance aircraft that followed, high-speed strategic jets that tried to outrun defenses, the U-2 relied almost entirely on altitude and planning to stay alive. Over the decades, the U-2 evolved from a single-purpose film camera platform into a family of reconnaissance aircraft, adapted to changing technologies and missions. Early versions focused on high-resolution photography, carrying large cameras that exposed long rolls of film to capture industrial complexes, airfields, and missile sites in remarkable detail. As adversary defenses improved and political sensitivities grew, engineers worked to increase range, payload, and survivability without sacrificing altitude. Sensor technology transformed the U-2 even more than airframe changes. Film cameras were joined and eventually supplemented by electro-optical systems that could transmit imagery in near real time instead of waiting for film to be recovered and processed. Synthetic aperture radar systems allowed the aircraft to see through clouds and darkness, revealing shapes and patterns that optical lenses could not. Electronic intelligence receivers mapped enemy radar sites and communication networks, turning invisible radio energy into charts and threat maps. The U-2's evolution also extended beyond traditional military reconnaissance.
Some airframes were adapted for atmospheric research, sampling high-altitude winds, measuring particles, and gathering climate-related data that scientists could not easily obtain in any other way. Other airframes tested new sensors or communication systems that later migrated to satellites and unmanned platforms once they proved their worth. That continuity gave the Dragon Lady a unique place in aviation history.
The U-2 Dragon Lady's legacy reaches far beyond its spindly landing gear and long black wings. Strategically, it helped bridge a dangerous gap between ignorance and overreaction in the early nuclear age, replacing rumor and worst-case assumptions with detailed photographs and measured assessments. Its flights informed decisions about bomber production, missile deployment, arms control negotiations, and crisis management from the Cold War through later regional confrontations.
In technological terms, the Dragon Lady helped pave the way for modern satellites and high-altitude unmanned aircraft by demonstrating what long-endurance, high-altitude platforms could achieve. Concepts such as modular sensor payloads, global basing, and rapid retasking across theaters carried forward into newer systems that followed.
For those who want to see a Dragon Lady in person, preserved airframes rest in air and space museums across the United States and in other countries. Visitors can stand beneath those long wings at national aviation museums, Cold War galleries, and base heritage parks, imagining what it felt like to strap into a pressure suit and ride the edge of space. Behind every U-2 were pilots, maintainers, analysts, opponents, and decision-makers, shaped by what its cameras saw when nothing else could look that far.